you think of Henry VIII children, you probably picture the ruthless Bloody Mary or the glorious Elizabeth I. But there was another child, one whose brief reign would reveal a darkness that even his notorious father might have found disturbing. Edward VI, the boy king who inherited the throne at 9 years old, would transform from a seemingly innocent child into one of England's most authoritarian rulers before meeting an end so twisted that it would haunt the Tudor dynasty forever. The story you're about to hear isn't just about a sick boy dying young. It's about how absolute power corrupts absolutely, even in the hands of a child. What you'll discover about Edward's final days will challenge everything you thought you knew about the Tudor legacy. Welcome back to Empress Secrets, where we peel back the layers of history's most enigmatic figures and uncover the truths that empires tried to bury. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now. It's your key to unlocking more tales of power, betrayal, and the human soul's darkest corners. And don't forget to like this video if Edward's story already has you hooked. Sharing it with a friend could spark their own journey into the shadows of the past. Remember, every like, share, and subscribe isn't just support. It's a declaration that you're ready to embrace the unfiltered truth, no matter how chilling. Let's dive in, because knowledge like this doesn't just inform, it empowers you to rewrite your own destiny. The year was 1537, and England was a kingdom teetering on the edge of chaos. Henry VIII, that larger-than-life tyrant whose 6 wives and endless quest for a male heir had reshaped the nation, finally received the gift he had prayed for, schemed for, and even waged wars over: a legitimate son. Edward's birth on October 12th at Hampton Court Palace was no ordinary event. Bonfires blazed from one end of the realm to the other, church bells pealed in joyous cacophony, and Te Deums echoed through cathedrals from London to York. The air was thick with relief, as if the very stones of England exhaled a collective sigh. For decades, the Tudor line had dangled by the precarious threads of female succession: Mary, the Catholic-leaning daughter of Catherine of Aragon, and Elizabeth, the fiery product of Anne Boleyn's brief triumph. But now, here was Edward, swaddled in velvet and gold, the living embodiment of Henry's divine favor. Yet, as with so much in Henry's tumultuous life, joy came laced with tragedy. Edward's mother, Jane Seymour, the third wife and the only one to give Henry what he craved, slipped into feverish decline just hours after the birth. Her body, weakened by the rigors of labor in an age when childbirth was a battlefield, could not withstand the infection that followed. 12 days later, on October 24th, Jane breathed her last, her deathbed surrounded by a court that whispered of omens and God's cruel jest. Henry, ever the dramatic soul, mourned her with genuine fervor, ordering her embalmed heart buried at Windsor and commissioning somber pageants in her honor. But beneath the grief lay a sharper edge. Edward was now not just a prince, but an orphan of sorts, his mother's absence a void that would echo through his sheltered existence. From those earliest moments, Edward was no mere child. He was a symbol, a talisman against the ghosts of dynastic failure that had haunted the Plantagenets before them. Nursed by a cadre of royal wet nurses and guarded by yeomen of the guard, the infant prince grew in an atmosphere of reverence bordering on idolatry. His cradle was a fortress of silk and statecraft, his every coup interpreted as prophecy. Henry's paranoia, honed by years of plots real and imagined, ensured that Edward's world was one of constant vigilance. Spies lurked in the shadows of his nurseries, tutors were vetted like generals before battle, and even his playthings, wooden soldiers and gilded tops, were chosen to instill martial discipline rather than whimsy. Imagine, if you will, a toddler navigating not the muddy lanes of a country estate, but the echoing halls of palaces where every adult bowed low and murmured of his divine right. Edward's isolation was profound, a gilded cage that severed him from the raw, messy joys of childhood. No scraped knees from romps in the garden, no squabbles with siblings over toys. Mary and Elizabeth, though half-sisters, were kept at arm's length, their own falls from grace, making them cautionary tales rather than companions. Henry, racked by guilt over his treatment of his daughters, whom he had bastardized in fits of matrimonial rage, poured all his paternal fervor into Edward. The king visited his son often, showering him with gifts, jeweled crucifixes, volumes of scripture illuminated in gold leaf, and promises of a throne that would eclipse Solomon's. "My jewel," Henry called him, his voice thick with the weight of redemption. But this adoration was a double-edged sword. It bred in Edward a sense of innate superiority, a belief that he was not born of woman and man, but forged by God's own hand for England's salvation. As Edward toddled into boyhood, his education commenced with the intensity of a military campaign. Henry spared no expense, assembling a faculty that would make Oxford's dons envious. But these were no gentle scholars spinning tales of Virgil and Homer for idle delight. No, Edward's tutors were warriors of the intellect, radical Protestants handpicked to forge the boy into a blade against the Catholic Old Guard. Chief among them was John Cheek, a Cambridge prodigy whose mind was a forge of Reformation fire. Cheek, with his lean frame and piercing eyes, saw in Edward not a pupil, but a vessel for divine wrath. Lessons began at dawn, Latin declensions intertwined with Luther's thunderous critiques of papal indulgences, Greek philosophy bent to justify iconoclasm, and history recast as a morality play where Catholic kings were villains ripe for divine judgment. By age 6, Edward was no longer a child reciting primers. He was a pint-sized theologian dissecting the Book of Common Prayer with the fervor of a monk. Cheek's methods were relentless. Daily disputations where Edward defended Protestant tenets against imagined Catholic foes, his small voice rising in passionate diatribes. "The Pope is Antichrist," the boy would declare, his quill scratching furious marginalia in his texts. Other tutors joined the chorus. Richard Cox, a firebrand who railed against popish superstitions, and Thomas Wilson, who wove statecraft with sermons on obedience to God's anointed. Every subject, arithmetic tallied the tithes stolen by Rome, geometry mapped the cathedrals to be razed, was filtered through this lens of supremacy. Edward absorbed it all like parched earth drinking rain, his mind blooming with arguments for why the Mass was idolatry, why relics were vanities, and why true faith demanded the sword. But knowledge without heart is a hollow thing, and Edward's upbringing starved his soul of empathy. Picture a boy of 7, poring over Fox's Acts and Monuments before it was even printed, his eyes wide not with wonder, but with a chilling zeal. He debated elders on predestination, quoting Calvin with precocious ease, yet he had never chased a butterfly or shared a secret with a peer. His friends were shadows, courtiers who flattered, servants who trembled. This emotional barrenness was the seed of monstrosity. Where Mary had learned resilience from rejection and Elizabeth cunning from neglect, Edward knew only elevation. He was told he was flawless, infallible, the hinge on which history turned. "You are the light of the gospel in this realm," Cheek would intone, and Edward believed it utterly. In his private prayers, scrawled in childish script, he thanked God not for breath or bread, but for the crown that awaited, heavy with the blood of heretics yet to spill. As the autumn leaves of 1547 carpeted the grounds of Westminster, England mourned its bombastic king and crowned his heir. Henry VIII's death on January 28 that year was a thunderclap, his massive frame felled by ulcers and excess, leaving a realm fractured by debt, dissent, and doctrinal strife. The coronation of Edward VI on February 20th was a spectacle of fragile pomp, a 9-year-old boy, pale and slender, processing through London in cloth of gold, his small hand clutching the scepter like a toy sword. Trumpets blared, crowds cheered, but whispers rippled beneath. A child on the throne, with wolves circling in the form of ambitious uncles and scheming lords. Edward's regency fell to his uncle, Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, a Protestant reformer with a vision of a gentler England. Somerset promised stability, a bridge between Henry's brutal break with Rome and a true Protestant dawn. He dissolved monasteries' remnants, redistributed lands to gentry, and penned laws against enclosure to ease peasant woes. For a fleeting moment, it seemed the boy king would be a figurehead, guided by wiser heads toward moderation. But Edward had other plans. From his first Privy Council meetings in the shadowed chambers of Whitehall, the 9-year-old asserted himself with a petulance that chilled the air. "This is not God's will," he would snap, his voice cracking with authority, interrupting lords twice his age to expound on the perils of papist remnants. Somerset, bemused at first, soon found his nephew's interruptions turning to dictates. What observers noted, and chronicled in hushed dispatches to foreign courts, was Edward's eerie detachment. He treated statecraft as a scholastic game, poring over petitions with the focus of a scholar annotating Aristotle. Death warrants crossed his desk like riddles, a priest accused of hearing mass in secret, a noble clinging to rosaries. Edward would pause, quill hovering, then query his counsel. "What saith Leviticus on false prophets? Doth not Deuteronomy demand stoning?" His smile, thin and triumphant, would follow as he signed, the ink blooming like blood on parchment. Contemporary diarist John Stowe recorded one such scene, the king, perched on a massive throne, giggling softly as he debated the merits of burning versus hanging for a relapsed heretic. "Fire purifies the soul," Edward pronounced, "as it cleanses the flesh." The councillors shifted uneasily, their mirthless laughs echoing hollowly. These were no mere tantrums. They were harbingers. Edward's religious fits, as courtiers dubbed them privately, erupted like summer storms. When Somerset proposed tolerance for private Catholic rites among the elderly, Edward hurled his goblet, wine splashing like sacrificial blood. "Treason against Christ," he shrieked, his face flushed with righteous fury. The Duke knelt, placating, but the boy king's eyes burned with a zeal that owed nothing to childhood whims. He had internalized his tutor's creed so deeply that compromise was not politics, it was apostasy, a stab at the divine heart. Letters from the period, smuggled to Emperor Charles V's spies, describe a child, as if possessed by the spirit of Elijah, calling down fire upon the unclean. Edward's disinterest in boyish pursuits deepened the unease. While other lads his age hawked falcons or tilted at quintins, Edward retreated to his libraries, devouring tomes on the Inquisition's triumphs. Servants found his chambers littered with sketches, racks diagrammed with pulleys, thumbscrews annotated in meticulous Latin. Efficax ad fracturam voluntatis, sed parum ad confessionum verum, effective for breaking will, but little for true confession. One valet, in a deposition years later, confessed to nightmares of the king's midnight mutterings, "The body must scream so the soul may sing." The boy who ought to have dreamed of knights and dragons instead fantasized of pyres and pleas, his intellect a forge hammering out instruments of pain. This fanaticism fused with absolutism like alchemist's gold. Edward's journals, preserved in the British Library, brim with glee at persecution's prose. Today, 3 papists yielded to the flame. He wrote at 10, their cries a hymn to reformation. He composed homilies, delivered from pulpits nationwide, urging the root and branch, uprooting of Catholicism, promising the sword of the Lord for the merciful. Thousands perished in those early years. Joan Bosher, burnt for denying Christ's humanity. Joan of Kent, racked for Anabaptist leanings. Edward reviewed each case, his endorsements crisp. "Proceed with zeal." Beyond faith, cruelty colored his court. Servants quaked under a regime of invented torments. A page spilling ink faced the wine shower, stripped and pelted with chamber pots in the great hall. Edward directing from his dais, quill noting, terror yields obedience swift. When a scullery maid whispered Ave Marias, her flogging left her broken. Edward's entry, lesson learned, error excised. Family fared no better. Mary, the scarlet-clad sister of Henry's first union, became the whore of Babylon in his missives, her masses a personal affront. Elizabeth, Protestant-leaning, was a pawn, useful if wed to a godly prince. When Uncle Thomas Seymour, Lord High Admiral, showered Edward with gifts, hunting hawks, jeweled daggers, the boy saw manipulation. Thomas's 1549 execution for treason? Edward watched from the tower, impassive, journaling. "The axe bites clean. a merciful end for traitors. By 12, Edward's grip tightened like a vice. Somerset fell in 1551, ousted in a coup by John Dudley, Earl of Warwick, later Duke of Northumberland. But the boy king, far from puppet, overrode them both. His injunctions of 1549 escalated to the Act of Uniformity in 1552, mandating the Book of Common Prayer under pain of death. Surveillance bloomed. Beadles patrolled parishes. Children snitched on parents for superstitious beads, rewards in silver for denunciations. Edward's thought police, inquisitors styled after Geneva's consistories, prowled, their ledgers fat with accusations. The king pored over them nightly, summoning informants for lurid details. Did she cross herself? Mutter Latin? Punishments he tailored. A baker for idle bread forced to eat his loaves laced with ash, choking on repentance. His creativity in cruelty was diabolical. Father John Forrest, a Carthusian holdout, dragged through London with faggots at his feet, stones from urchins pummeling as Edward observed from a balcony, chuckling at the Divine Comedy. Journals brim with innovations, water torture for the timid, branding for the bold. Pain is the pedagogue of faith, he opined, citing Paul with twisted glee. Paranoia infected the court. Mercy was treason. A lord hesitating on a warrant? Demoted to the stocks. Edward's absolutism, unchecked by adolescence's doubts, birthed a theocracy of terror. Mary's shadow loomed largest. Edward's hatred was visceral, a brother's love inverted into venom. Bastard spawn of Aragon's whore, he scrawled, plotting her disinheritance via lawyers twisting Henry's will. Scenarios filled folios. Arrest at dawn. Trial in Star Chamber, confession scripted. I renounce the devil's dregs, culminating in beheading over burning, a mercy from flames. Advisors blanched. 1. Sir William Cecil urged restraint. Edward's reply, a glare, then a note. Cecil wavers, watch him. Hours vanished into rants, Mary's name a trigger for seclusion, emerging wild-eyed with fresh decrees. Elizabeth spared outright venom was merchandise. Marry her to the elector. Edward schemed, eyeing alliances against France. Her letters, affectionate, pleading, earned curt replies. Serve the gospel, sister, or join the damned. Family bonds? Illusions shattered by ideology. Nobles, too, were chessmen. Loyalists elevated, doubters discarded. The Duke of Norfolk, Catholic relic, languished in the Tower on Edward's insistence, his execution delayed only by the king's youth. Illness struck in 1552, a cough that bloomed into consumption's specter. Tuberculosis, historians concur, not his lungs, but arsenic, prescribed as quintessence of gold for strength, likely hastened the end, turning healer to assassin. Fever sharpened his edge. Weakness fueled frenzy. I shall not rot unavenged, he rasped to Dudley, plotting the device for the succession. Mary barred, Elizabeth too, the crown to Jane Grey, his cousin, a Protestant pawn wed to Dudley's son. The scheme, sisters seized, nobles purged, a godly commonwealth of inquisitions eternal. Meetings in fevered secrecy birthed horrors. Lists of 200 Catholics for the block, abbeys raised anew, a presbytery of purity to spy souls. Edward, bedridden but buoyant, dictated. Seize their lands, burn their books, let no popish breath foul our air. Hand trembling, he filled choirs with genocide's blueprint. Mass graves for recusants, children re-educated in faith schools. Conspirators quailed. The boy burns brighter and dying, one whispered. Agony crescendoed. By spring 1553, Edward's frame withered, skin jaundiced, hair shedding like autumn leaves, nails loosening in bloody roots. Odors of decay wafted from his chambers, convulsions racking his slight form. Hallucinations blurred zeal and madness. Visions of martyrs cheering pyres, Mary crowned in hellfire. Physicians bled him, purged him. Arsenic scorched veins, turning beauty to grotesquerie. Lucid, he railed. Finish it. God demands their blood. Final days, screams piercing nights, rants on martyrs, pleas to conspirators, crown Jane, slay the sisters, purify or perish. July 6, 1553, Edward expired at Greenwich, 10 past midnight, body convulsing in a final spasm. Last words, gasped to Dudley. Preserve the true faith from that bloody woman. No tears for family, no remorse. Only curses for Mary, prayers for Protestant fire. Courtiers exhaled, relief masked as grief. The plot crumbled, Jane's 9-day queenhood a farce, Mary's acclamation a tidal wave of Catholic resurgence. Edward's ghost lingers. Traditionalists paint him puppet, but archives scream otherwise. A tyrant in toto, journals alight with sadism. Power's alchemy transmuted innocence to iron, isolation bred sociopathy, ideology armored it. Had he lived? A Cromwellian dystopia. Surveillance eternal, nobility Catholic cult, England a Geneva of the Thames, oppressive as any bourgeois dream. Yet mercy immortality. His death spared the realm his ripening wrought, birthing Elizabeth's golden age from Tudor ashes. Edward warns, power plus purity equals peril, especially in untested hands. Education sans empathy forges monsters. Youth with crowns invites apocalypse. Here at Empress Secrets, we celebrate these truths, not to scare, but to steel you. If Edward's fall ignites your fire to conquer your own shadows, smash that like button. It's your vote for unyielding curiosity. Share this with someone who needs to hear how history's villains teach victory. And subscribe now. With notifications on, you'll never miss a revelation that could redefine your empire. You're not just watching, you're rising. Until next time, uncover your secrets, claim your throne. Fade to black.